started. So listen, I mean, Russ and I sat down. We work across the street from each other in Boston, and so the connection continues. But as I was thinking about tonight, I said, to Russ, we all went our separate ways. We went on and did bigger things, bigger jobs. There's a Pulitzer Prize in this group. There's an Oscar in this group. If you've seen the movie Spotlight, if you know what I'm talking about. And there are so many other accolades that we've all won in this room because I knew that we could all do that. And as I said, we're coast to coast. We have children who make us proud now. Tomorrow's Father's Day. My own son is here. Think about Tom. And the good news is he has not asked me for money all day. But, we went all... What was that?
The day isn't over yet.
We went all over the world, but we came back to this place, and I said to Russ, why is this special? Well, you all told us how special this was. We read the biographies you wrote. We read what you said. The best times we had, the best fun we had, were the days we spent with each other.
And it didn't make any difference where you worked. Framingham News, South Middlesex News, Middlesex News, Metro West Daily News, doesn't make a difference. The place united us. And the proof is right in the biographies many of you wrote. This was home. I was asked recently for about the 1000th time if I missed newspapers, and I came up with a different answer, and it kind of surprised me. And I said, I miss the news like I miss my parents. I grew up there. And you grew up there too. We found family and friends in that bewildering joint, 33 New York Ave, with cheap linoleum, cheap coffee, and cheaper bosses. The news was paradise found.
All right, so we're going to do a little history here first, and maybe some of you remember this, and this will be not the ad-lib portion, but we started back on July 6, 1897. Charles McPherson printed the first edition of the Evening News in the basement of the Tribune building. Somebody said they remember that. Charles McPherson was the editor. Lenny Baglioli was the sports editor. Lenny here?
No.
Thank God. As you read the history of this place, you realize that at that time, Framingham was considered the fastest growing town in Massachusetts. And they were even talking about having a city then. And I'm sure there was a Stefanini somewhere who wanted to be the first mayor. That's an inside Framingham joke. Maybe not, maybe those that were in the Bellingham office did not get that, but poor John ran and lost on the first bid for mayor. They have a terrific mayor now, by the way. I work at Bloomberg. I do a radio program. We've had her on, Yvonne Spicer. Man, sharp as a whip. I mean, just what Framingham needs. I tell my colleagues at work that Framingham will soon be the capital of Massachusetts because the rising ocean, Boston. What do you have after Boston? Newton? All due respect, Russ lives in Newton. They're going to have to move inward. Framingham will be, you heard it here. This will be in the newspaper tomorrow. Framingham will be the capital of Massachusetts soon. And here it's my chance to show the shirt. Gotta love Framingham for those in the back. So that was that. And Russ, what happened after those fortuitous days?
What year are we up to now?
I sort of rambled on about 1897.
1897.
That's the purple dot.
So, if you read the Framingham News history for many years, it was all about, they were very proud that they got the paper out every day, just over and over again. It was an uninterrupted streak like Lou Gehrig. And that went right up to 1978 when the blizzard came and they finally didn't get a paper out for the first time in their history. Then in 1980, they moved from REI to the New York Avenue, and we're printing 50,000 copies a day. 29 communities, 400 employees, bureaus in Natick, Marlborough, Maynard, Holliston, Milford, Waltham, and Concord. I was looking at all the comments of the different generations of news people, and I was struck by the fact that it felt like the 70s and 80s were about expansion and getting those 9 zoned editions out, and the store, and also having publishers in composing, looking at stories and making you rewrite headlines and stories, where there was really hands-on right from the top. And in the 90s, things began to change. I trace it to when Jim Hobson said we couldn't drink in the building anymore on Friday night.
That's odd that you would trace it to that.
Yeah. So, the sports department felt it was their duty and mission to wait for West Coast scores. But we would only do it if we could drink beer while waiting for West Coast scores. And when it started feeling a little corporate when they told us that we couldn't drink in the library anymore, to which point we drank in Brian Hallahan's car.
By the way, hold on, where's Hallahan? He's still here? Stand up, Brian. Brian was more important to, there he is. Mr. Cool. Go ahead.
So we'd sit in Brian's car on a Friday night and have a few beers, and I think we'd say, like, where's the high school dance? It felt like high school all over again. So expansion and doing 9 editions, it started to become economies of scale, and we started buying newspapers. I think Hart Hanks maybe bought the transcript of the Waltham Tribune and some dailies, Century dailies, so we were like 16 papers when Fidelity bought us. And then I'd say in the next 5 years, in about 16 buys, if I remember correctly, we became an organization of 100 newspapers. If you were lucky enough to be the editor of the Middlesex News, you had 4 dailies and 22 weeklies under you. The press room stopped doing just one paper or several papers. I believe it, when I was there, 46 papers would be printed there during the course of a week. So, from the 70s and 80s, when it was, all about expansion and 9 zones and Parry ripping up headlines, in the 90s, you didn't see your publisher. If the publisher came to me and said, the paper looked good, I said, well, have you read it yet? and in truth, they didn't have time because they're just trying to make their number. So that's how things changed. 94, we started a sunrise edition, a morning edition. That's when I switched from sports to news. And that's when the news went to full color every day. So that was something, because right after we went to full color, there was Oklahoma City. And so now you were dealing with terrible photos and making the decision whether to use them in color, which was a lot different. It just black and white just wasn't as impactful. Then along the way, so Fidelity had us at this point, or right after, and then in '98, we had coined the term Metro West Daily News in '83. Greg Supernovich.
Yeah. Now, Russ, what did he win for? They got like dinner for 2, right? Honest to God, that was the prize.
Finally Michaels or something?
Yeah. No dessert. But I digress.
Ken's Steakhouse was too expensive. And one of the runner-ups, I didn't know this, the Data Belt Daily News was... The Data Belt Daily News is in my notes here. Or maybe Data Belt. But anyways, Greg came up with Metro West Daily News, and by '98, every, Metro West Medical, the hospital was called that, everybody was called Metro West except us. Still, the publisher was nervous about, should we change? But by that point, the internet was starting to come on, and they finally made the decision, because Middlesex would always be blocked. And so it became, so there's a death knell right there in a way, so we had to change to Metro West.
Hey, listen, can I jump in here a minute?
Yes.
There's somebody in here who's very bitter about the fact that he didn't really win the top prize, but he won, apparently, the slogan under Metro West was, "Your hometown newspaper." He knows who I'm talking about. Jeff Kramer. Jeff in the audience? Jeff, stand up here. Now, Jeff has been as long as I've known Jeff decided that he needed a prize for coming up with your hometown newspaper. Correct?
I was wondering if you were going to give me credit.
Okay, I did. So there you go.
That's your prize.
That's your acknowledgement among your peers. Let's give a round of applause for your hometown newspaper.
So we renamed it Metro West in '98, and then in '99, Fidelity, they were decent stewards, all things considered. Like, they'd always give their traders new computers, so we'd get all the leftovers. So, so tech-wise, they were pretty good to us. But in 1999, we were sold to the Herald, and that looked like it was going to be a flip job. And so after that, I left in 2001, and then, let's see, Gatehouse, it's hard to keep track after that. I think Gatehouse bought the News in 2006. I think they also bought in succession the Ledger and the Enterprise, and eventually the Cape Cod Times. And that's
Worcester.
where we are today, correct?
Worcester,
Gatehouse, right?
Portsmouth,
And Worcester, yeah.
Providence Journal. I could keep going.
Yeah. So it'll be a test afterwards.
And then we moved.
So, there were a lot of big stories during this era 80s and 90s. GM closing, O.J. Simpson, Oklahoma City, the marathon bombing, 9/11, all these different stories. But, I think, the task in the 90s is to keep the staff focused on the reporting and try not to let them get distracted by all the papers and the economizing that was going on.
All right, we have a special moment now because in the House, Ken Hartnett's here. Now, Ken once decided we should call Tony Colonna the Pope of Metro West. And I thought that was a hell of a headline. What I would suggest is that we have a College of Cardinals here tonight. We have 5 former or present editors of the Middlesex Metro West, you call it what you will. To my left, Russ Lodi. Would everybody who once or now runs this newspaper please stand? I think there are 5 of them. Like counting, let's have a round of applause. I'm going to name them. I'll find Russ Lodi. There's Rick Holmes, Richard Lodge, Ken Hartnett, and Ann Brennan carries the flame for us all. Thank you, Ann. We wrote memories, so we picked out a few of them. And these span the generations because I'm a little older. I took the older people. I know the older group. I speak their language. And Russ is going to talk about some of the younger folk. This is a classic. Asa Cole could not be with us tonight. Asa hired me. He hired a bunch of us. This is how it went with me and Asa. I was living at home in Acton. The phone rings. My mother goes, "There's a call for you." And I got to the phone and I said, "Hello." He goes, "This is Asa Cole." I said, "Hi." I was scared as hell. And he goes, "Can you start Monday?" And I said, "Yeah," click. I was in. Now, many of you probably have similar stories. It wasn't pretty, it wasn't romantic. Asa writes this, and a lot of you can remember this. And I decided instead of paraphrasing, we should hear from Asa himself. He couldn't be with us tonight. He said, 3 Mile Island was ready to melt down in March of 1979, and I was in charge of putting out the weekend paper. Somehow my desk buddies, Mike Cezanne, there they are, over there on the left, pointed them with derision. Mike Cezanne, Ken Tokars, Brian Rometz, they're all here tonight. Conspired to load a bogus story into the system. He took the bait, he says. Even the governor was reportedly evacuating the state of Pennsylvania, and I believe Cezanne wrote the famous words, "I'm getting the hell out of here." Hold on. Can we confirm that, Cezanne?
That's pretty close.
Hold on. It was exactly it. All right, pretty close. Asa says, "I flew off the desk and told production to stop the press." Now, it doesn't say plural here like you usually see. Stop the press is. Stop the press. Of course, Mike, Ken, and Brian were waving and laughing over my shoulder to make sure my orders weren't followed. Big lesson learned that night. Always double check the byline as closely as the story. In this case, it was Roger Ramjet. He said, Cole, thank you, Mr. Cole. Thank you for hiring me. I
got one from Yomats, Brian Yomats. This is a Bob Moore story. Bob used to drive Yomats nuts. Bob would drive in the morning with some weird story he heard on the radio, and he'd ask Yomats to call AP to see if they would write something up on it. And Brian captured it like this. Bob came in and told him about the story where some golfer got mad and killed a goose with his putter. So he told Brian to get AP to write it up. Brian calls AP, you guys got anything on some golfer who killed the goose with a putter? AP, where did this happen? UMass, no clue. AP, we'll check it out, but don't hold your breath. So UMass would go back and do the addition, and then a little while later Bob would go, hey, where's that golfer story? They haven't moved it yet. And this would go on for a while, and then finally, where is it? And Brian says, oh, I don't know where it is. And Bob would say, God damn it, do I have to call now? So that was Bob to a T.
So I think we talked already. I've talked to everybody tonight about the personality test. I know I talked to this table. This table of, questionable people over here about the personality test. It was formerly titled the Personal Audit. It was a personality test produced by Science Research Associates of Chicago, copyrighted 1945. I took the test on Route 30. Russ made the reference to REI. That was the outdoor equipment company that took over from the Middlesex News. November of 1980, publisher Bill Perry is quoted in Boston Magazine about this test. By the way, I took the test, 3-hour battery of stuff, and I drove right out of the parking lot on Route 30, didn't look either way, and a car just smashed into me. And the state cop later says to me, what happened? I said, I was in there for 3 hours, and I was thinking, and he said, okay, relax, kid. But here's what Bill Perry said about the test. Where's Jen Gardner? Jen, I'm going to read this because Jen and I used to have important discussions about feminism in the newsroom, and we still did. We had a discussion today. But Jan, Perry goes, this is why we had the test. We wouldn't want 6 girls who were all very unstable or irritable working together in the ad department. There are no right or wrong answers, although there are a couple of trick questions. Of course, women are usually more insecure than men, but we take that into account. 1980. All right, did we come a long way? Yes, we have. What do you got?
Well, looking through the remembrances was when Ken Hartnett arrived. We got the big editor from the city paper, and it was exciting. Funkhauser remembers Hartnett wearing a fedora and a white hat on his first day. Goldberg remembers him banging on a trash can to announce the start of the morning news meeting. Ken would come out of his office, pick up a trash can, and just start whacking us to wake us all up to get in there. Bob Cuddy remembers when Ken told him newspaper people were getting too respectable. I got a short haircut once, and he called it a respectable mohawk. I remember smelling his cigars and the time in one of his first weeks when someone in pre-press got caught making counterfeit money. And all the Boston stations showed up to interview Ken. Now, we thought Ken was going to put us on the map, but I don't think Ken thought that the exposure he was going to get right off the bat was answering Dan Housley's questions about counterfeit money coming out of the press area. So I was in sports then, and I was trying to get on Ken's radar screen, and so it was like a 4 o'clock meeting, and Ken had just done some television interviews, and there was kind of a silence, and Ken was collecting himself, and they said, hey, Ken, you've only been here a week, and the news is already making money. And Ken wasn't happy. What do you got?
I want, Dave, would you help us out with this next one? Come on. Everybody knows Dave Granlund. I love Dave, and everybody knows what a talent he is. But I'm going to get this in here. He always drew my nose too big. I have a very nice nose. But if you look at my cartoon back there, it's big and Irish looking. All right, I'm sorry, I digress. You had a story for us, and you told it with the group tonight as we were eating. And it's in my list. It's about Bob Moore and a certain reptile.
Hello, everyone.
Hi, Dave.
As you all know, Bob Moore is a very caustic fellow, and he would blow off at anything. But I knew I had been in the same small office with him at the old building on Cochituate Road, so I knew what buttons to push and what not and when to do it.
Put the mic closer.
And so Bob would always be facing the corner in his new office. And on the way to work, and I came in from Westboro to Framingham, I saw this huge snapping turtle that came up out of one marsh and was crossing the road. It was going to hit. So to save it, I threw it in my car in the back seat. And why not? And I had a baseball glove in the back, and so I wouldn't get bit. He had very long necks. The thing was,
Oh my God.
that wasn't exaggerating on that. And so I didn't want to leave it out in the hot car during the day, so I brought it into work. And first I went in and got a box for the custodian area, and I put it in there, brought it in, and I'm not going to leave it in my office. So Bob has been in there typing since like 5:30 in the morning, and I figured I'll just play a little trick on him. So I took the turtle out, and its head had recessed into the body, and I put it in the middle of the floor and ran out of his office. Well, I figured he'd turn around and look to see the turtle on the carpet around him, and I looked back in, and I didn't hear anything. The turtle's gone. And I saw it was slowly moving underneath his desk toward him. Underneath. And of course, those who knew Bob had a handicapped leg. He could not move very fast, and he was sitting there, and I got down underneath his desk, and he said, I'm not going to use the language he used. What are you doing under my desk, with a few expletives thrown in there? And I said, I'm trying to get something. He said, he was swearing again. He was on deadline with what he was writing. And so I grabbed the snapping turtle by the tail.
Oh, no.
He had very long claws, and he had carpeting in there. And I had to pull him out, and the turtle is... And then I lifted it up. It was very heavy by the tail. And he said, oh, Jesus, Joseph, Mary! He jumped from his swivel chair up onto the desk. He started being handicapped. I was just laughing, and I said, he said, how'd that get in? He said, I don't know, I saw him crawling around. So anyway, Bob could be grumpy and grouchy. I wouldn't say he had his kind of moments, but he was a straight newsman, focused on whatever he was doing, peripheral on there, but occasionally we could have a little fun with him too. But there was one time when we didn't get a raise, and he had a face that just reminded me of Ebenezer Scrooge. We didn't get any raises one year. So I did a caricature of him with the tiny little bag of raises. I had him dressed with a top hat, and I had a bah humbug, and I taped it to his door, and I left, and I came back after the Christmas holiday, and that cartoon was ripped up into tiny little eraser-sized pieces, and he had shoved it all under my door. But I didn't sign my name to it, but I'm sure he did.
What's yours?
What do I have here? Well, like I said, the 70s and 80s were about expansion. McCory had 4 writers, a photographer, and a news hole to fill 7 days a week when they launched the Waltham edition. The sports department had Mike Tempesta. Linda Hall remembers being a reporter in the New Milford Bureau. Kent Tokars thought it strange that a newspaper that regularly proclaimed itself to be the crossroads of New England business activity didn't have a business section. So we started one. Then there were the times that news interrupted life. In '87, Hartnett got the idea that the sports department hold a 3-point shootout for all the high school teams. He got this idea 2 weeks before I was supposed to get married. And he insisted that I set it up. So I did, and then I had to go get married, and Lenny ran it. And I think Lenny got kind of bored halfway through and declared a winner and drove off. We ended up having that thing for 25 years, but but Ken got the idea 2 weeks before my wedding. Dom Slowey checked in. Ken Hartnett called him out to, I think it was a State House reporter, called him out to Framingham for a meeting, and his wife was pregnant and 8 days late. So sure enough, he gets right out to Framingham, and his wife immediately goes into labor. And then he has to drive back, I think, to the South Shore in all this traffic. And he made it just in time to take his wife to the hospital. This is not funny, but it shows about the dedication that we all showed every day we were there. This would be the Worcester fire on a cold December night. A reporter named Jennifer Rosinski, I was talking to her recently, remembers being in a skirt and a skimpy jacket on an empty stomach on Friday night after a long week. She was the only one left in the newsroom, and she had to go to Worcester, and she left the building with the orders, find Route 290 and look for a plume of smoke. She got there, freezes her ass off, and phones it in. And I was talking to her the other day about it, and this is where she talks about Mike Soretta. She says, I still remember Soretta telling me, Jen, paint a picture. Tell me what the smoke was doing. Show me how the fire moved. She said it was a real-time education in storytelling. Meanwhile, back at the news, me and Julie... Meanwhile, back to the news, me and Spitz were coming to the grips with having to redo page 1 and move the Ashland menorah lighting to 1B.
How many pictures?
And I think Julia fought me on it a little bit, didn't you? We didn't know what was happening in Worcester, but so we talked about that as the scanner was making panicky sounds in the background. And that was a very memorable night and a good memory of a reporter going out and just going to Worcester and then working with Doc over the phone, because it was rewrite in those days, you couldn't file, and they came up with a gem, and Ashland menorah lighting got bumped.
And you got phone calls. All right, listen, I want to bring up somebody else if he's willing. These, you can't have good material without a good editor. And this is a guy I actually owe a lot to, and he came a long way too from Florida. At one point, I think he put in a good word for me that I could do a decent job putting up the Sunday paper, and I'm eternally grateful. Mike Zazat, can you come up for a minute? Shaking his fist at me. Put all this together for us, and by the way, you're going to get a booklet at the end of this with all your stuff in it, so take it home. I better not see these on eBay. It's all these stories. But I want Mike, you have a story. No? You will come up? No, about any. Your fondest memory at the news.
I think the one that's in the booklet, if I'm remembering right. Okay, we had just expanded into Milford, and our very first edition.
And by the way, we're in Milford, so.
Bleep me out, okay, when you need to. Anyway, so the first edition, I had to write the 1A headline for the local story. We had sent a reporter to cover, I think it was the Board of Public Works, and it was jammed. People were complaining about the restaurants scraping grease out of their whatever and throwing it in the drain. That was the lead story for the premiere edition.
That's local news, bro.
What do you do with a story like that? So I wrote a headline, Greaseballs Plague Milford Sewers. And publisher Bill Perry comes walking by to sign off the page. I was luckily at my desk. He screams, who the F wrote this headline? Don't they realize that Milford is 50% Italian? I disappeared behind my desk and I lived happily ever after.
You saw, it's wonderful. I was telling somebody this today. We came down from Hopkinton, the shortcut, and there's all these roads, Purchase Street, whatever, but there's this little market, Peter's Market. It's like the throwback. to the old neighborhood market, they exist here. And then you go by these streets, to Mike's point, Sabina Telly Road, Vicky Road, so it must have been the developer's wife. I mean, this is really still very ethnic, and this morning we got here to start working on this, and out on the soccer field, there was some really good soccer being played. I'm imagining most of these guys out there, probably in their 30s, Latin Americans, all of them, but it was great soccer, so I'm trying to help you out here, Mike, So Mike has put those together, and we're gonna have those for you at the end of all this. Do we have any other memories that we should share?
I just gleaned Mike's collection and just came up with some examples of dedication. One was, I had forgotten this, Janet Mitchell drove 28 hours from Florida with her mom and her cat and all her belongings in a U-Haul just for a tryout.
Oh my God.
I thought she was homeless. I felt bad, I hired her. She must have known I was going to go into affordable housing because she picked her off. Brooke Lester came all the way from Ohio for an interview. I picked her up at the Wobbin Tea Stop in Newton and drove her out and gave her the sales pitch, and she had a lot of sticker shock about the cost of living. And then I asked her today, and I said, "Who'd you go home with? Did I take you home too? Did I take you back to the airport?" And she said, "No, Chris Bergeron gave me a
Oh
ride."
God.
So Bergeron was the other end of the recruiting pitch.
Is Bergeron, hold on, is Bergeron here?
Bergeron
Yes.
here.
Take a bow, Bergeron. Bergeron, the wise man of the feature department. Or you call it the toy store of news? Or? He's being very reticent back there. I'm sorry to interrupt.
That's okay. The other example that caught my eye about dedication was from Jen Lord Paluzzi. She was in the Milford office, and she got word that management was coming down to do some layoffs, and Jen suspected that she might be one of the ones being laid off. This was like in 2008. Again, this was the economy of scale era is in full swing now. And at the time, Jen was working on some special section. And what she recalls, what she said, for some horrifying reason, she speeded up to finish the special section before management would come down and lay her off.
Dedication.
So, I mean, that's, and Jen, you're horrified by that?
Very nice. So now let's get into this very special section. We want to acknowledge some people who are not with us. Publisher Bill Perry, we've talked a lot about him. He had a son named Bob. Most of you that were new to the news don't know that. And Bob had a very distinguished career with the AP. Bob died recently, but we'll get to all that. He was the night editor in 1971. He signed a union petition, his father, Bill Perry. And if you know Bill Perry, this was not going to go over well. So Perry found out, he was livid. Perry is said to have lurked around the newsroom with reporters speculating he would fire his son. This is an incredible show of solidarity. The staff passed notes to each other, and at quitting time surrounded Bob, and he walked him out of the building. Where's my son? This should never happen between a father and a son. The son was quoted, "I remember the first time my father talked to me after that, he told me," and this is where the big punishment comes, "he was sending me to the Holliston Bureau." Sorry. There's Jan Cross in the front. Holliston. Vicki Ogden was the Holliston Bureau chief. Vicki's here, right?
She's here.
Yeah. So that was his. It was an interesting. I missed all that, by the way, but it was interesting. So Robert Perry died earlier this year at the age of 68. Bill Perry was the publisher from 71 to 82. He died in 93. And Russ.
Well, my Bob Perry story was, so I went to Colby and so did Bob. And somebody had told me that, and that if I interviewed with Bill Perry, then I should play the Colby card big. So I went in there and I did a tryout, and down at REI on Contiguous Road, and Then I went and I talked to Bill, and he told me a story about his son. His son was the editor of the Colby Echo, and it was a time when they were contemplating co-ed dorms. And Bob, to illustrate the issue, got two naked people to walk down a hall, two students, and superimposed the president and the college president and his wife's head on the photo. And they shut down the paper. And Bill was so proud of his son for that. He must have been at the AP, and you didn't unionize, obviously. So that, and then Bill told me I'd flunk the typing test and come back when I could type. I thought I had it.
Yeah, well, that's the payoff of this story. You thought you were in
Yeah.
when you were talking about Colby. I mean, well, I'm here, baby.
But they wouldn't take handwritten stories.
Bob Moore, editor of the News for 12 years. He died in 2013 at the age of 92. I think a lot of us have a Bob Moore story. I've told a couple tonight. Anything from you, Mr. Lodi?
I like the Gomez one.
Yeah. All right. And now this is a real special thing. Jane McCann, who I don't know, maybe maybe the conscience of the newsroom. Does that fit? So her three daughters are here tonight. Would they please stand up? We were talking earlier about spell check. You know, all us old journalists like to, they can't spell anymore. And Jane was certainly, kind of the head of all that, because one of the things I used to remember, if a young reporter was in the newsroom and they wrote a story about Framingham and this, whatever happened on Union, and the thing came out in the paper, Union Street, Jane would blow a gasket. And that was, again, talk about better than journalism school, right? She worked as a columnist, obituary writer, but there was so much more. I mean, Jane was the one you gave the first newspaper to, because she found the mistakes, and she found what was wrong. She told you what was right. But, I mean, I'll tell you, we all have stories. Let's talk about Jane later. But that was, I want to take that moment and thank you all, the three of you, for coming tonight.
Virginia Lucier, among the hundreds of celebrities she interviewed.
Yes, let's clap, please.
Betty Davis, Marlene Dietrich, John Wayne, Bob Hope, Elizabeth Taylor, Alfred Hitchcock, Henry, John, and Peter Fonda, Ronald Reagan, Arnold Schwarzenegger, Robin Williams, Liberace, Madam Chiang Kai-shek, Princess Grace of Monaco, and the Beatles.
And they were all her friends. I got to tell one story. Virginia would just die if I said this, but she would just yell at me. One of my favorite stories that ever appeared in the newspaper, she was a fastidious reporter at the Chateau de Ville. Some of us remember that. And Trini Lopez, who remembers him? Yeah, okay, there's a few of them. Trini Lopez was performing at the Chateau de Ville, but apparently after hours, or before hours, he slipped over to Shoppers World and shoplifted underwear. And Virginia had the story. I mean, you said Virginia was a celebrity reporter, but you know what? If one of those people did wrong, she was there. So we all remember her.
I was briefly accent editor and in charge of the food page. And I was stumped. I was really stumped for an idea for a lead story for the food page. And I told Virginia this. And we talked around several ideas. And then she just stops me. She says, give me a minute. So I did, and I just went about my business. And then she slips a phone number in front of me with a New York area code. She said, here, call this number. I said, huh? Who is it? She said, just call it, just call it. And went back to her desk. I called it. It was Frank Oz from the Muppets. And I interviewed the Swedish chef.
This is Bill Edmonds. Let's have a round of applause for Bill, because I mean, everybody knew Bill, and he was right up there with Virginia. These are the pillars of the the early days. I'll tell one quick story. I said to Bill, I had a guy on the run once. He was doing bad things to people in downtown Framingham. He had slum. He was a slumlord. So we found out where he lived, and we went up and knocked on the door, and his wife said he's not home. We're coming back down the street. Bill said, I want that photo. So we saw him. I said, that's got to be him. Now, we weren't sure it was him. Bill turns this truck around, and he ran the guy off the road. And I thought, wow, I mean, I want to get the guy, but I want to kill him. And he jumped out of his thing. He had the camera, and he goes, you! And he took this picture of the guy, like, you know, deer in the headlights, and we put it in the paper. And that's Bill Edden. For me, what do we got next?
Mac Fisk died on Veterans Day, 2009.
I want to make sure that we notice Mac's wife is in the audience, correct? What is it, anything? You have good things to say about it.
Mac spanned a couple of generations of the news. He worked as a merchant mariner, served as an Army radio operator during the Korean War, attended Northeastern University for a few semesters, but left to join Boston Harbor Pilot. He then began as a sports writer at the news, and then became sports editor and city editor for joining the Providence Journal. Following retirement, he returned to part-time copy editor of the news until 2008. Mac was unsung, there's a quote, Mac was the unsung behind-the-scenes hero that every great newspaper story has, said Russ Lodi. You quoted me on that, thanks a lot. But, so I started in sports in '79 with Bill Griffin and Rick Smith and Lenny, Artie Davison, and so Mac was already gone, and they spoke about Mac, they just loved Mac. And so I heard a lot of Mac Fisk stories when I was in sports, and I think Mac also was the one who started TD Pointer. So then after his retirement, Mac came back. I hired him to copy edit at night when we were running the morning edition. And I think at the time Mac was living in Brookline, taking care of his mother on a farm somewhere up north, and then maybe went down to Mattapoisett to put the sailboat in the water, and then would drive to news to do a shift. I don't know when he slept, but Mac was great on the desk. And this is a time where, you know, if you had a couple of good copy editors and a good design person like Pat Capo, you could make lemonade out of lemon. Mac Fisk and Mike Soretta on the copy desk. And it was good cop, bad cop, fire and ice. And these two guys were just terrific. And also, when I was in sports, I was TD Pointer too, so I used to always kid Mac that I was his great-grandson.
Rich was an avid bowler, but he was also, all his friends, and he had many in the newsroom, got together and had a memorial bowling tourney at, FICA?
Fico's, yeah,
In
Franklin.
Franklin, the hometown of Russ Lodi. Pat Hyde, remembered as smart, funny, hardworking, and kind in the 80s. She was a copy editor, headline writer, layout designer at the news. Ron Doyle, media critic, political columnist. Ron was one of a kind. Died too young. I think Ken and I went to see him at the hospital. Never forget that visit. Karen Krebsbach, reporter at the news in the 1980s, died 2010 at the age of 52. She was executive editor, international editor at U.S. Banker, having worked at the Foreign Service Journal, the Daily Journal in Caracas, a Wall Street Journal, the Boston Globe.
I think Karen was the first politically correct person I knew. And I mean that in the best sense of the word, because she was somebody who would point out a newsroom's blind spots. And I think around in that era in the 80s, I think Karen and some others started questioning our saturation coverage of things like Miss Natick. And
Do they still have this, David?
I don't know.
I don't think so.
Nobody knows that question.
And so Tom and I were kind of talking about this last night, and you know, I think people like Karen Krisbach made you start to realize, take a look at your newsroom and realize where your blind spots were. I know in the 90s, if I looked up at my night news meeting and it looked like a bowling league, I knew that our front page was in trouble. And there were so many great women editors and reporters that I looked up to and worked with in my career, and I know everybody did. And I wanted to use Karen's memory here to mention some of them. And I'm going to miss some, so my apologies. And it's dark, and I'm nearsighted. You know, when I got there were all sorts of good editors. It was Nora Lockwood, Linda Hall, Karen Bailey. Vicki Ogden was my first boss.
Vicky's here tonight, all the way from Maine.
Actually, you know, in my tenure at the News, I think I mostly worked for women. There was Vicki, and I worked for Andrea Haynes as her managing editor, and then Mary Jo Meisner was the overall editor of the whole company, and she picked me to be editor after a nationwide search that lasted about 6 months. I think people must have turned her down or something. She finally turned to me. But anyways, Mary Jo was a great editor. And then Ann Brennan is now running the paper.
Keeping the legacy going.
Yeah, and then there were a lot of other people who, you know, were great colleagues and really made the paper sing. You know, if you wanted to put out a good newspaper in the 90s, you had, again, Mac Fisk and Soretta on the copy desk, and you had Pat Capo doing design. And there were other great editors, Julie Spitz, Lisa Drucke, Nancy Olson. And then also, you know, one of the things we did in the 90s, if anybody went out on maternity leave, we started this program, which is called the Second Shift Copy Editing Save on Daycare Subsidy Program. So when anybody would come back, I would tell them, you know, look, why pay for daycare? You know, one of you works days and the other one works nights and weekends. And so we had a lot of great copy editors during that time. And I always felt with a lot of the women editors I had, man, they were just so efficient and so reliable. And I think just because, you know, they had a job and then they had to go home and they had to take care of their kids or go take care of an elderly relative or maybe take care of a husband who was about to die of malnutrition. So, you know, there's just many great women. And I think about people like Karen who sort of, you know, worked at showing what a newsroom's blind spots were, and I think newspapers are a lot better today.
Linda was a copy editor for a bit. She came back to do copy editing. We had, I think, we already had Tom and Kevin was on the way, but we had children. So I was the stay-at-home dad that night, and I figured that was my job. Because Linda was done working at the newspaper. Hartnett calls me up and he says, I need a column. I said, Ken, I'm home watching the kids. Didn't matter. Had to do a column. He said, you can do both. He's back in the room there listening to me. But yeah, so you reminded me of that story. Let's go quickly here. Dick Haynes, Night Desk. Man, I'm indebted to Dick Haynes. He served as a combat photographer in Vietnam, a correspondent. Denise Marie Mize, 2016 at the age of 75. Alan Werdeman, 2011 at the age of 63. Tom Desilets, who I had a lot of fun with at the age of 59 in 2012. And a couple others. Fran Seagrave. Everybody knew Fran. Early 90s, she was around. Sheriff Fran. Dan Fowler, 2013. And Russ, I know you have a couple to wrap this up with.
Yep. Mo Woodman, age 52, 28 years at the News. He was a typesetter. He transitioned the operation to Offset. He also planned the move from Cochituate Road to New York Ave. He also, I grew up in Franklin, and Mo raised his family in Franklin, and I'd walk back into the mailroom, and it was like a high school reunion. There were so many guys from Franklin there, and Mo just had everybody from Franklin in that mailroom. Then Barry Woodman worked at the news for 12 years. He died at age 44. Yeah. And Brian Woodman, who worked at the news for 14 years, and then went on to a career up in Claremont, New Hampshire, and Barry, Vermont. He died at 51. Brent Woodman's here tonight. He's from Atlanta.
Where's Brent, by the way? I haven't seen him yet. Hey, man. Good to see you. I got to jump in there quick. Mo's kids worked at the paper and it just always, I don't know if I've ever told you this. My dad was a partner in a small factory in Hudson, and all of us, with 5 brothers, we all worked at his shop. Whenever I saw all you guys in there working for your dad, it always reminded me of my situation, and I was very proud of that. And it's Father's Day tomorrow, so happy Father's Day, everybody.
And the last one we wanted to talk about was Jason Levine. And bear with me a second, because this is just an amazing story. So I mentioned we had moved, we had started a morning edition, and at one point I needed a wire editor, and Jason had been a police reporter, but part-time as a Northeastern intern, but he never took a full-time job, even though he was very capable. And one day I was editing a story about a basketball player in high school who was really good, and he had cystic fibrosis, and the reporter had not explained fully in the story what cystic fibrosis was, so I went and got a medical dictionary over Adam Gavin's desk or something. And I'm sitting there writing in what cystic fibrosis is, and Jason, who was doing morning cops 2-3 days a week, he would cough his ass off, and it would drive me nuts. But I was reading this definition of cystic fibrosis, and I realized this must be what this fellow has. So fast forward a couple of years, and we're on the night desk, and I need a night editor, and I bring Jason in, and I sort of say, I have a theory, and do you have cystic fibrosis? And he said, yes. And then I said, well, is that why you're not taking a full-time reporter's job? And he said, yes, because the treatments he needed during the day to live kind of made it difficult. So I convinced him, well, geez, if you become a wire editor, it's regular hours. So he took it, and he was unbelievable. He would blow through the wire and then help everybody finish his pages, and he was unbelievable. The problem was, he was dying because he badly needed a lung transplant. And he was working with an oxygen tank, and if you asked him how he was doing, he would say, how you doing? So finally he became so weak, he had to go to Mass General because he wasn't strong enough, he wouldn't withstand an operation. It was during like one of those snowy winters, maybe 96, when we got like 120 inches of snow. And some woman from Holliston, that was a triathlete, drove off the road and had a car accident and died. And 3 days later, Jason gets the lung transplant. Now, we didn't know this at the time, but Kim Wales, who I think is here tonight, she was pasting up obits, and she noticed this obituary, and that the woman, the triathlete from Holliston, was an organ donor. And she came in and she said, I think this might be the donor. It turned out she was. So Jason gets the lung transplant. He comes back, and he just picks up where he left off and was just a fantastic editor. Along the way, there was this other reporter in the newsroom, Allison Taylor. Allison Taylor was moving and needed a couch moved. So Scott Matson and Jason went to help her move the couch, but they were really after Allison Taylor. Jason got the girl. So Jason ended up moving to Delaware and working for the paper in Wilmington, and he became a top-notch sports editor and then news editor who pioneered all sorts of things, podcasts and all that stuff. And he had 2 children, coached them, played in hockey leagues, and it's just a fairy tale. Anybody who's worked with Jason and saw how he was and saw what he became it was just a fairy tale. And, you know, a lot of it we were seeing on Facebook, and as you know, Facebook can disguise things. And during last year, I think he started to have complications, and he died in, I think it was October, at age 46. And if you had seen the outpouring of respect for Jason and what he meant to the journalists down in Delaware for their careers, it's just a fairy tale, and he was just a wonderful editor, and I know not everybody in here knows them, but it is just, it's a movie, and he really exemplifies, you know, the Middlesex Metro West Daily News was a starter paper for a lot of people. A lot of people went on to better things, Projo, the Globe, Pulitzers, everything like that. Jason Levine is one of them.
Thank you, Paul. Very good. Mention everybody, and if we forgot people, we did probably forget people. It wasn't on purpose or malicious, but we thought when we sat down to do this with the help of Linda and Nicole, the reunion committee, Russ and I sat down, these were the people we wanted to talk about because they really spoke about all of us in some way. And Nicole is going to show us some of the other names as we talk about this. And I'm going to tell you, you know, this is a great party tonight. It would be greater if they were all here. So let's give them a round of applause. Right? Try that again. If you were there long enough.
I thought he said Milford.
To have said, I worked either at the Framingham
whiteout.
News, South Middlesex News, Middlesex News, Metro West. The idea is, if you were there for more than one name change, is that better?
Yes.
More than one name change, put it in. So this is the longevity question. Number 2, keep up please. Count New York Avenue, Route 30, Speen Street, all as separate locations. Count every bureau separate. You worked at more than 3 locations at the News.
Can you say it again, Tom?
Yeah, more than 3. You were at more than 3 locations when you performed your duties for this newspaper. That includes
Multi. I think it's multi.
Route 30, huh?
It's under multi.
It's under multi. That's the key word. See the multi?
Well, you skipped mobile.
I did.
I don't know how it's. Tell them to get dessert if they want dessert.
Just like your personality test.
If you want, this is kind of like the personality test. Dessert is available, but again, if you worked at more than one location, scratch out multi. You did it.
New York Ave, Cochituate Road, Speen
Cochituate Road, New
Street.
York Ave. Does that make sense?
No, it's got to be for Metro
That doesn't
West.
make sense. You know, this is why you people are in newspapers to begin with. You don't get it.
Yes, I worked
What
at
is it,
2.
Brandon? What is, he's,
Do you want to fill mine out?
Brandon is totally confused. Russ, what's our next question?
Mobile? What's mobile?
At least once you slept at the News.
Where's Bergeron?
At least once. Let's take a look at this. So, slept is the key word. I'll go back to it. Did you sleep? All right, here's where you had to sleep. In the main office. We're at the box called slept. All right, everybody find the word slept. Listen carefully. You slept either in the main office, a bureau, or in the parking lot.
You fell asleep while you were working?
Or you went out, you fell asleep in the car. Or you were talking to your editor and you fell asleep. All right, tell them what the code word is.
What's the code word?
All right, appeared.
You appeared in a news story yourself. Bylines don't count.
Appeared is the code word.
Fill in an extra square of your choice if you were in a police beat. No questions asked.
All right, the next key word is delivered. Do you see delivered? It's the 6th square.
You appeared.
Delivered, here's the question. You delivered the news by truck, by foot, or filled in for your son or daughter. Delivered is the key word. Did you deliver the newspaper?
Anne has to, unfortunately.
Ann Brennan is filled in the square.
The next key word is subscribe. You currently subscribe to the news, print or online. Liz, we subscribe online. Get that one.
This is good. This is a getaway for two, and the point here is returned. I'm sorry. What did you just say? Subscribe?
We skipped mobile.
Returned is the next key. We'll get back to mobile for those keeping score at home. Stop bugging me about that. Right? The key word is reside. No. Jeez, I'm sorry. All right, it's been a long day. You returned is the key word. You resigned, laid off, or were fired, and you came back.
Suckers.
How many can say that?
Next key word is married. You married someone you met at the news.
Well, there's a few.
That whole table
All right.
over there.
Okay. Next key word is wild. Everybody following wild? You had an encounter of any kind with wildlife within news space. This includes birds, mice, snakes, insects, invalid.
Bowls, say
Editors,
bowls.
fellow reporters acting like wild animals don't count either. So this is a wildlife encounter, therefore the code word is wild.
Used an X-Acto knife. If you used it on another person, lose a square.
That was vintage, right? Okay. Finally, the box is still. If you're still at the news, you can mark that one. All right, so there's a little confusion at the beginning. I began to understand what I was supposed to do halfway through this. So we missed mobile. So I'm going to say that again for you. You were okay, so here it is. You were on staff under more than one. I'm sorry, that's masked out.
Where's Linda? She made it.
All right, this is mobile. Are you ready for mobile? Count New York Ave, Route 30, and Speed Street, all as separate locations. And count every bureau for this question. You worked at more than 3 locations at the news.
Isn't that multi? That's multi.
If you were
I
mobile,
missed it. Okay, let's do this then. I did miss a question. Here's the question I missed. You worked in more than one department. Okay, just flip those. That'll be mobile, all right? That could be composing, advertising, press room, photography, news, sport. All right, it's the same difference. You people took the personality. You can figure this out.
Spoiler alert, there's no prize.
All right, did that all make sense? No, Dave's still looking up at the sky.
You should stand. Stand up. You should stand.
And I would like to recognize someone who was still at the news till a few months ago, and that would be Richard Lodge. I left the news a week before 9/11 and passed the baton to Richard Lodge. And Richard came in from the Northwest Bureau, and he stayed at the paper 16 years, shepherding all these papers through very difficult times, and it was just did a great job. And then he had a second home in Newburyport, and the Newburyport News job opened up, and now he's the editor up there, and I think it's a terrific spot to land at a small paper, and with his expertise. And in my job, I read newspapers from all over the state looking for housing stories, and I can see his fingerprints all over that paper, and so I just wanted to recognize Richard Lodge, who was still at the news till a few months ago. He worked Friday nights helping Funk put out the Saturday tabloid. Remember the Tab? And then he remained on Dayside morning copy desk until 1994, when he was reassigned to the night desk to put out that new morning edition. And you needed Mike on that night desk because he was the best. Mike Soretta's been on the night desk ever since. And I'm sorry about that, Mike. And shepherds our print edition out the door. But I think we know there's a lot more to Mike. Mike has edited thousands and thousands of stories and has taught so many reporters the craft of writing, and has basically helped them if we had to hold a party for all the people Mike has helped get to a better newspaper, we need a room bigger than this. He's the heart and soul of the news, and you never would want to put out a paper without Mike. And so we're giving Mike a Lifetime Achievement in Editing Award presented to Mike Soretta with gratitude and respect from the hundreds of reporters you have coached